Answer one question before you call me cruel. If one apology could save the job that rebuilt your life, would you force your husband to give it? My boss had gone pale. 12 clients were laughing, and my husband was looking past me at the gold title pinned to my chest. I slapped him before he could say the next thing. Then I told him he would apologize because I was the only person in that room protecting our future. He turned his wedding ring once, calm in the way that always meant he would give in. I was certain he would sit down and do what I asked. My name is Ingrid Larson. I was 43 and Director of Enterprise Partnerships at Novaline Systems. I knew which client needed a window seat and which one would sign only after believing the idea had been his. That mattered. People like me did not rise by waiting to be noticed. Mason and I had been together 12 years and married 9. He was an electrician at the municipal water plant and could find a bad relay by its hum. He owned one dark jacket and a 17-year-old green pickup. I had loved that truck once. After my first promotion, Mason drove us above Lake Row with gas station coffee. We sat on the tailgate while the city lights came on. He said the new title sounded right beside my name. We drank the burned coffee anyway. That was how he loved me. He fixed things and assumed I could read the rest. When I wanted pride, he checked my tires. Of course, he called his silence space. I called it leaving me alone. My hunger for better rooms started at a scholarship dinner when I was 17. A donor handed my mother an empty plate because he thought she worked for the caterer. She set it on a service table without correcting him while girls from my class watched. By dessert, I had decided nobody would ever confuse me with the help again. The first joke happened outside the Marlowe Museum at Novaline's spring donor preview. I wore my black badge with its gold N. Graham Vale, the president of our division, looked at Mason's pickup in the valet line and asked whether maintenance vehicles now used the front entrance. 3 people laughed. I counted them because I always counted when a room changed sides. Graham wore grey suits and the calm of a man whose driver waited out of sight. He spoke softly, so insults sounded like advice. I laughed and added that Mason trusted any machine old enough to need him. My husband looked at me first. Then he turned his wedding ring once around his finger. I knew that gesture. He used it when a waiter brought the wrong order or when my sister asked why he never applied for management. It meant he would swallow the answer and punish me with quiet later. Of course, I smiled wider. Graham touched the edge of my badge and said I was learning how to keep a room alive. Inside, Mason asked the event coordinator for her full name and the guest feedback link. I assumed the valet had scratched his door. He used the tablet near the coat check, then joined me beneath the glass stairs. Graham watched him return. Then my boss told me that the next board dinner needed spouses who could take a joke. Board dinner was the only part worth hearing. The jokes became a habit because Graham never repeated one exactly. At a Sunday technology brunch, he asked Mason whether city electricians were paid in cash or free tap water. At a client box during a basketball game, he offered to send my husband the name of his tailor, then said the first fitting might cost more than a municipal month. At Novaline's summer garden party, he asked if the green pickup had airbags or only prayers. Each time, the people nearest him waited half a second before laughing. That half second mattered too. It showed they were checking whether the joke was permitted. Graham gave permission by looking at me. I always smiled. Sometimes I improved the line. At the brunch, I said Mason's overtime rate was the only reason we could afford the parking. At the basketball game, I told everyone his jacket had attended more weddings than some of our clients. The laughter warmed the space around Graham, and I stood inside it. Mason turned his ring after every joke. At home, he did not accuse me of cruelty. That would have been easier. He asked why I had told Graham what he earned. I said the number was not private because city pay bands were public. He asked why I had made his work sound like a failure when that same work had covered our rent during my first 2 years at Novaline. I heard a ledger opening between us. Mason was good at ledgers of the heart. He remembered every shift he took, every meal he packed, and every hour he waited for me to come home. He rarely said what he needed while there was still time to give it. He brought the list out only after I disappointed him. I told him he was jealous of Graham because Graham represented a level of success Mason had never wanted badly enough. My husband looked at the table instead of me. Then he said Graham represented a man who knew employees had to laugh. That answer irritated me because it turned my promotion into fear. I had spent 11 years earning the right to enter those rooms. Mason had spent the same years refusing every supervisor exam offered at the plant. He called peace a choice, then judged me for choosing more. I said all of that. He listened without interrupting, which made me raise my voice. When I finished, he turned his ring and asked whether I wanted him beside me at the next event or only available as material. Of course, I told him not to be dramatic. The first voice note began as a convenience. Novaline's company messenger had a small microphone beside the text box, and Graham hated long written updates. I used it for client summaries while walking between conference rooms. One afternoon, he sent a message asking whether Mason had recovered from the Taylor joke. I held the button and said my husband recovered from everything by going quiet. Then I laughed and added that the silence could be useful if Graham needed another easy target. The note lasted 21 seconds. I listened once before sending it. My voice sounded quick and confident, the way I wanted Graham to hear me. Talia Brooks sat across from me in the executive lounge. She was Graham's chief of staff and the person who controlled which problems reached his desk. Talia heard the note through my phone speaker. She covered her mouth when I called Mason an easy target, then told me Graham liked people who understood the joke before he had to explain it. Talia was not cruel. She had spent 6 years making powerful men think their plans had arrived without help. My nerve entertained her because her own position required caution. When I crossed a line, she could enjoy the view without leaving footprints. Graham replied with a laughing reaction and asked for better material. I had some. Mason's pickup had belonged to his father, Owen. They bought it damaged when Mason was 19 and rebuilt the front end together. Owen died before they finished replacing the cracked dashboard. Mason could afford another vehicle now, but he kept the truck because the last grease mark his father left was still beneath the hood near the battery tray. He told me that on our 4th date. We had been sitting in the pickup outside my apartment while rain hit the roof. He trusted me with the story before he trusted me with a house key. I did not give Graham all of it at once. First, I sent a voice note saying the truck was a family monument that could not survive highway speed. A week later, when Graham wanted something sharper for a client cookout, I explained that Mason polished an old battery tray because his dead father had touched it. I paused before pressing send. 1 second. 2. Then the note went blue. That mattered because I still had a choice during those 2 seconds. I simply believed the choice was between being memorable and becoming ordinary again. The cookout was held behind Novaline's training center, where smoke from the grills settled under white canvas tents. Graham waited until 4 clients stood near us. Then he asked Mason whether the pickup was transportation or a mobile shrine to men who never learned to move forward. The laugh came late. I supplied the missing push. I said Mason would rather repair a dead man's truck than update his own life. Mason's thumb found his ring. 1 turn. No answer. The woman beside him stopped smiling. Her name was Nisha Patel, though I knew her only as someone from corporate policy. Mason asked her whether guest reports went to the local office or the independent group. Nisha said the independent group and showed him a square code on the back of his event card. I pulled him away before he embarrassed me with a complaint about one bad joke. He put the card in his pocket. On the drive home, I accused him of trying to damage my career because his pride had been bruised. He said he was trying to establish what had happened while people still remembered it. I told him that sentence sounded like a man preparing a lawsuit over laughter. He said it sounded like a man who had asked his wife 3 times to stop helping another man humiliate him. 3 times. I counted them in my head and rejected the number because the events had been different. That night, Mason sat at the dining table with his phone and the event card. A reference number appeared on his screen. I saw Nisha Patel's name beneath it. He closed the page when I walked past, not because he was hiding anything, but because he no longer expected me to care. I called it sulking. Then I went upstairs and sent Graham another voice note. I told my boss Mason could file all the little forms he wanted. He would still attend the autumn client reception, and by then Graham could have a new joke ready. The autumn reception took place on the roof of the Sable Hotel. Heat lamps clicked above the tables, and the wind kept lifting the corners of the printed menus. I wore a white suit and the black badge with my gold title. Mason wore the same dark jacket, freshly pressed. The green pickup was 6 floors below in a public garage because I had asked him not to leave it with the hotel valet. He noticed that request. Of course he did. Before we went upstairs, he asked whether I was ashamed of the truck or of the man who drove it. His tone was flat, which let me choose the easier answer. I told him I was ashamed of his need to turn every practical decision into a marriage test. He rotated his ring once and followed me into the elevator. Graham had invited 2 prospective clients from a medical software group. Their contract could move my annual numbers by 12%. I knew their names, their preferred drinks, and the exact concern each had raised in the last meeting. My boss knew only which one controlled the budget. Still, when he entered the roof, people moved toward him. That was power as I understood it. Whether the movement was voluntary did not matter to me. Talia stood beside the bar and asked if Mason had brought the famous truck. Her smile appeared, then faded before the question finished. I told her it was hidden downstairs where it could not lower the property value. She looked at Mason and said nothing. Graham arrived 10 minutes later. He praised my client preparation in front of the group. Then he turned to Mason and asked if city employees received performance reviews or simply checked whether the lights still came on. 4 people laughed. 1 client did not. Mason said his plant used written safety reviews because mistakes could put a whole district under a boil notice. Graham replied that some people carried the city while others carried laptops through hotel bars and called it work. Then he raised his glass toward me as if he had defended my profession. Letting the exchange die would have made me look uncomfortable. I wanted the clients to see that Graham and I shared a rhythm. I told them Mason once spent a Sunday cleaning the grease mark his father had left beneath the pickup's hood. I made my voice soft, almost loving, which gave Graham more room. Graham asked whether the city paid bereavement benefits for machinery. The budget director laughed into his drink. Talia looked down. The client who had stayed quiet set her glass on a tray and stepped away from our circle. Mason looked at me for a long time. His hand moved to the ring. 1 turn. Then he asked the event coordinator for her name. She was Pilar. He repeated it once, thanked her for bringing the guest tablet, and entered a short note with his right index finger. He did not hunch over the screen or hide what he was doing. That calm made the act look weak to me, like a child telling a teacher because the other children laughed. I kept talking to the clients. For the next hour, I performed control. I explained our rollout calendar, moved Graham away from a consultant he disliked, and brought the budget director back after a call. 2 contracts moved forward while Mason stood alone near the heat lamps. When I finally reached him, Mason said he wanted to leave. I asked whether he intended to punish me in front of clients. He said leaving quietly was the only option I had not turned into a show. That sentence touched something real, so I attacked the delivery. I said he always waited until I was working before needing an emotional emergency. I said he had no idea how much pressure I carried because he had arranged his life to avoid competition. Mason's face changed then. It was not anger, but something smaller. He said I had used the only story about his father that he had asked me to keep private. The wind lifted a menu between us. I caught it and pressed it flat beneath my phone. For perhaps 2 seconds, I saw the grease beneath Owen's old hood. I remembered Mason showing it to me in the rain. I remembered how carefully he had told the story, as if the mark might disappear if he spoke too loudly. Then Graham called my name from across the roof. I put my badge straight and told Mason that adults could not label every memory confidential after sharing it with a spouse. The thought closed cleanly. I went back to work. Mason left in the pickup. I took a car service home 2 hours later. The apartment was dark except for the stove clock. Mason sat at the table with his event card, phone, and wedding hand resting beside both. I asked whether his report had made him feel powerful. He said it had made the event accurate. I laughed because accuracy was my word at Novaline. I managed proposals worth millions. Mason maintained pumps and filled out guest complaints. The comparison seemed complete to me. He asked if I had sent Graham the story before the reception. I said Graham and I talked about many things. He asked again, naming the truck and his father. That was his quiet debrief, but it felt like an interrogation because he finally wanted a plain answer. I told him yes. Mason's fingers closed around the ring without turning it. He asked why I had made another man's approval more important than the one boundary he had set. I told him Graham respected people who could take pressure. I said my husband had begun treating every joke as proof that successful people were empty. Then I told him his real problem was that my boss had become the kind of man a room listened to, while Mason could not make his own wife listen at a kitchen table. He did not answer. His silence gave my sentence more room than it deserved. The following morning, Graham called me into his office. My own voice was playing from his phone when I entered. It was the note about the truck. Talia stood near the window. Graham laughed at the part where I called the pickup a family monument and said I knew how to make ordinary material useful. Useful was the word. He had not called me sharp or talented, only useful. For one breath, I understood that I was also material in his office. Graham could replay my laugh whenever he wanted. Talia could watch. The same room I wanted to enter had already found my function. Then Graham closed the recording and said the vice president role would be discussed after the winter client dinner. Vice president made every other word irrelevant. My sister Elise came to the apartment the next Saturday. She brought a box of old photographs our mother wanted scanned and found Mason in the garage replacing a cracked line in the pickup. I was at the dining table preparing client notes when Elise asked why he had missed our mother's birthday dinner. I said he was still offended by a harmless story at work. Mason came inside before I could give her my version properly. Grease darkened one sleeve. He placed the truck keys beside the black name badge I had left on the counter. The two objects looked wrong together, which annoyed me more than it should have. Elise asked what story I meant. Mason told her I had given my boss the private reason he kept his father's truck and helped turn it into a joke for clients. My sister did not raise her voice. She put the photographs back into the box and asked whether that was how my company decided who deserved promotion. I told her not to judge a professional world she had never entered. Elise worked at a dental clinic and went home at 5 most days. She knew patients, forms, and the same 4 co-workers. She did not know what it took to remain visible in a company where every director wanted the same 2 chairs. Elise said she knew what it looked like when our mother accepted that empty plate at the scholarship dinner. Then she said I had become the person holding it out. Mason looked at the floor. I told myself he enjoyed having a witness. Elise left without the photographs. Her usual Sunday call did not come the next day. I sent 2 messages. One was read. Neither received an answer. Mason slept in the guest room after that. He still filled the coffee machine before work. He still changed the filter in the furnace. His care became mechanical, which proved the complaint I had made about him for years. He could maintain a home after withdrawing from the marriage inside it. One night, I found him in the garage with the pickup hood open. He was not repairing anything. His palm rested near the old grease mark. He asked whether I remembered the first time he had shown it to me. I said I remembered, but memory could not be used to control every future conversation. He asked if privacy meant anything when the person holding it wanted a promotion. I offered a compromise. He could stop attending Novaline events. I would tell Graham that plant emergencies kept him away, and nobody would expect Mason to laugh anymore. I called that kindness. It was really an offer to hide the person I had helped make embarrassing. Mason saw the difference. He said the problem was not the next dinner. The problem was that I wanted to keep the man, the job, and the private entertainment separated so I never had to choose what I was doing. I accused him of making my career sound dirty because he had stopped growing years earlier. He turned his ring once. Then he closed the pickup hood and said he would attend one final company dinner if I answered a single question before it. He wanted to know whether I would defend him if Graham crossed the line again. I said I could not promise to manage 2 adult men during a business event. That was an answer. He treated it as one. At Novaline, Talia began taking longer to reply. A joke that once earned 6 laughing icons received one. When I sent her a voice note about Mason moving to the guest room, she responded the next afternoon and said private things were becoming too private for work chat. I called her cautious. Of course, I did not call her frightened. Graham remained warm because the winter dinner was close. He asked me to prepare a renewal plan for Norcrest Health, our largest account. Their procurement director had privately told me the company would renew if our increase stayed below 8%. That number belonged in the restricted deal room. Graham asked for it while he was leaving the office, and I sent it in our direct voice thread from the parking garage. I also told him Mason would attend the dinner. Graham replied that a good spouse understood the value of supporting the person with the real career. Then, he asked whether the old pickup had produced any new stories. I pressed the microphone. My first note described Mason checking grocery coupons even though we could afford full price. Graham reacted with a laugh. My second said Mason would tolerate almost anything until my vice president title was signed because he confused patience with love. My third repeated Norcrest's price limit and suggested Graham use it before the client changed position. 3 notes, 48 seconds in total. I deleted the conversation from the phone view afterward. Not from guilt. I was clearing space and avoiding another argument if Mason saw a preview on my screen. Company systems kept business records somewhere, but direct voice threads felt as temporary as calls. I had heard compliance warnings for years and treated them like weather alerts in another state. The week before the dinner, Novaline held a product demonstration in the old railway hall. Mason met me there because we planned to drive straight to my mother's house afterward. Nisha Patel stood near registration, speaking with a vendor. When she saw Mason, she excused herself and walked over. She knew his name. Nisha asked whether he had received the reference number from the rooftop event and whether the museum follow-up had reached him. Mason said yes to both. He asked if guest reports remained separate from local management. She said they did and that he should use the same channel for any related incident. I interrupted and asked whether the two of them were still discussing parking complaints. Nisha looked at my badge, then at Mason. She said she could not discuss the contents with me in a public hall. The exchange annoyed me. I decided Mason had exaggerated the jokes and Nisha enjoyed policy more than people. I told him we were late for my mother's dinner. In the car, he said I had heard enough to understand this was not about parking. I told him guest reports were designed for bad food and broken elevators, not marriage disputes. He asked why every dispute between us now had my boss standing in the middle. I had no useful answer, so I used the true one. I told Mason he had never once asked what reaching vice president meant to me. He had decided ambition was vanity because that allowed him to feel morally above any goal he was afraid to want. He showed love through repairs, then acted confused when I needed words, pride, or even interest. For years, he had left me alone in every room that mattered to me before Graham ever entered one. Mason did not deny it. His hands stayed on the wheel. After a long silence, he said he had failed me there. He had treated my work as something that took me away instead of something I had built. Then he said his failure did not explain why I kept handing another man pieces of him. Being right about the first part made me feel right about all of it. At home, Mason took the museum event card, the rooftop reference email, and the winter dinner invitation from the desk. He placed them in a plain folder. Then he removed my emergency contact card from his wallet and set it beside my badge. I asked if that was supposed to scare me. He said it was supposed to keep the next decision simple. I reached for Talia after he went upstairs. My message showed as read at 10:18. No answer came. The next morning, Graham confirmed that the board chair would attend the winter dinner. He said a strong night could settle my promotion before Christmas. I chose a black dress that made the gold letters on my badge look brighter. The winter dinner was held in the Hawthorne Salon at the Astor Hotel. Dark wood covered the walls, and small brass lamps made every glass look expensive. 12 clients sat with 6 Novaline leaders around one long table. The board chair, Caroline Webb, took the center seat. Graham sat on her right. I sat on his left with Mason beside me. Talia's place card stood near the far end, but her chair remained empty. I checked my phone twice. She had sent a short message saying she was ill. There was no apology, no private joke, and no promise to call later. I told myself her absence gave me more room. Mason wore the dark jacket again. He had repaired the loose button with black thread. I asked why he had not bought something new after everything Graham had said. He replied that a good jacket did not become worthless because an insecure man needed it to. I warned him not to arrive ready for a fight. He turned his ring once and said he had arrived ready for the answer I had already given. The first hour went well. Norcrest accepted the demonstration schedule. Caroline praised my renewal plan. Graham mentioned that I was ready for more responsibility, and the words reached every person who mattered. I counted the faces that turned toward me. 8, then 10. This was the room I had been building all year. During the main course, Graham asked Mason whether the water plant allowed spouses at its holiday party or whether the city saved money by holding it near a working drain. 2 clients laughed. Caroline did not. Mason continued eating. Graham tried again. He said it must be comfortable having a wife whose bonus covered the difference between public service and adult ambition. I smiled and told the table Mason contributed in ways that did not appear on a bank statement. The line sounded kind until the room understood it. More laughter came. Graham leaned back, pleased. He said loyalty was useful in a household, but ambition eventually needed company at its own level. Then he told Mason that one day I would stop dragging him into better rooms and bring a man who already belonged there. The clients looked at me. Defending Mason would have made the joke look true, as if he needed his wife to protect him. I decided the stronger choice was to prove our marriage could take it. I laughed. I said Mason would never notice the replacement until the new man moved his truck out of the driveway. The sound around the table broke unevenly. One man laughed too loud while someone else coughed. Caroline set down her fork. Mason looked at me. His thumb moved around the ring, slower than before. One complete turn. Then he stood. He did not lift his voice. He asked Graham whether successful men usually checked the board chair's face before deciding if their own joke had worked. Graham's smile held, but his eyes moved toward Caroline anyway. That movement earned the first laugh. It came from the Norcrest procurement director, short and surprised. Mason said Graham never mocked Caroline, the clients, or anyone who could refuse him without losing money. He chose spouses, junior staff, drivers, and servers because payroll had trained the room to mistake waiting for permission as respect. Graham opened his mouth, but Mason continued. He said a man with a driver, a title, and 6 people arranging his day should not need a municipal electrician to feel important after dessert. 3 clients laughed. Then 5. Graham's face changed color above his white collar. My career moved in front of me like a glass slipping from a table. The board chair and the clients were watching my boss shrink beneath the husband I had promised would behave. The truck and voice notes did not matter. I thought about Vice President disappearing from an office door that did not exist yet. I stood and slapped Mason across the face. The sound was smaller than I expected. That made the silence afterward worse. My hand stayed raised for a second. Mason did not touch his cheek. He looked at me, then at the gold title on my badge. I leaned close and told him his little performance was about to cost me my job. I said he would apologize to Graham at once, sit down, and let me repair what he had done. Mason's fingers returned to the ring. 1 turn. He asked whether I was certain I wanted him to finish in front of everyone. I heard surrender in the question. Of course I did. Mason always offered one last quiet opening before he retreated. I told him to finish by apologizing to the man whose evening he had tried to ruin. Caroline watched without blinking while Graham adjusted his cuff. The clients waited. I sat down because I believed sitting first proved the room still belonged to me. Mason did not apologize. He said Graham bought laughter with salaries. Without them, no one there would volunteer to hear him discuss another man's clothes. Then my husband turned toward me. His voice stayed level. He said I had offered successful people pieces of the person who believed in me before my badge had a gold letter. His silence became usable when I called it weakness. Graham controlled the title, so I called cruelty networking. No one laughed now. Mason said my accusation in the car was true. He had stopped asking what my work meant and withdrew when conversations hurt. Neither failure had moved my hand or sent Graham the story about his father. He pulled the ring from his finger. The skin beneath it was pale. He set the ring across the word director on my badge, asked the hotel manager to preserve the guest list, and left. Graham called it a private marriage spilling into business. Caroline said he had invited it and laughed until the target spoke. She left before dessert, followed by 4 clients. I looked for Talia's empty chair, as if illness might still send me help. At 8:30 the next morning, Nisha Patel waited in the people integrity room with Caroline and outside counsel. Graham brought his lawyer. My access badge failed at the elevator, so security took me upstairs. Nisha placed 5 guest reports on the screen. They covered the museum, training center, rooftop, product hall, and hotel. Each listed a time, witnesses, and the insult Mason remembered. Mason had not stolen my phone or guessed a password. He had given the same plain account to the same independent channel while I changed mine. His dates led people integrity to the messages sent before each event. Nisha pressed play. My voice filled the room. One note called Mason an easy target. Another offered his father's grease mark. I promised he would tolerate anything until my promotion was signed. The last note gave Graham Norcrest's protected price limit and offered new material for dinner. Of course, Graham blamed my need for attention. Nisha played his reply asking for something crueler than the truck and tying the vice president discussion to my usefulness. My hand reached for the water glass. I moved it an inch and left it there. I called the recordings private and out of context. Nisha said they were reviewing event harassment, an assault before clients, and restricted deal information in the wrong channel. They were not judging my marriage. My version had nowhere to enter that sentence. Graham asked for a separate interview and stopped looking at me. Before noon, Novaline put him on leave and removed his name from the succession vote. Talia did not attend the meeting. My call went to voicemail and stayed there. That afternoon, a courier delivered Mason's divorce petition and noticed that the first property conference was scheduled for January. Mason remained in the house while I rented a furnished apartment beside the airport road. My bonus was cancelled, and the account we had used for travel became bills only until the divorce was settled. Elise answered questions about our mother but never invited me to Sunday dinner, and Talia removed me from every private thread. Graham kept his salary during the investigation, but his photograph disappeared from the leadership page and his board promotion went to someone else. Novaline terminated me for misconduct and the Norcrest disclosure, then declined to provide more than my dates of employment. I had believed powerful people laughed differently, as if every joke pulled me one chair closer. Graham used my marriage to fill a room, and I used Mason for the same reason. When the room became dangerous, my boss asked for another lawyer and left me inside the evidence. The company let me keep the black name badge after security punched through the chip. The ring still covers the word director on the badge I am no longer allowed to wear.